Hi everyone, I hope you're all safe and well. I normally don't come on and do like intro videos about me or anything before I start the video. I normally just get straight into it. But I thought it would be weird to just do a video without acknowledging the fact that I haven't made a video in like a decade. So yeah, sorry for not being on. Thank you for everyone who's still been watching and commenting and stuff. Yeah, just January and February I wasn't well. It's nothing serious anyway. It wasn't COVID related or anything like that. Yeah, just wasn't well. Mental energy, physical energy, everything was just gone. And then once I started to feel better, it was kind of nearly getting back into the headspace of wanting to do a video, and stuff like that. And had my list of cases that I have next that I want to do. And I just found, not that I just didn't want to do them, I just couldn't make myself do them. And I didn't want to force myself to do something and not do it, like to just half-arse it. So I said I'd give myself time, and then all of a sudden it's April. So yeah, so we are back anyway. Hoping to do all the videos that have been on my list and then continue on with more. So if there's any that you want to hear about or anything like that, just comment or message me or do something. And yeah, anyway, so to get into today's case, you will know that I have talked about and have given out about the fact that in Ireland, the life sentence does not mean life. It doesn't even mean half life. It barely means a quarter life. And pretty much as soon as 7 years have passed, they're allowed to apply for early release, for parole. Usually won't get it that quick, but it still means that the process is there. The victims or the victims' families have to like kind of dredge up everything and make statements and stuff like that so early after only 7 years. But yeah, but today's case is actually about, and I've mentioned him once in another video which I will bring up, but there was one man who didn't apply for parole. In fact, he didn't seem to want to leave prison at all. This is the story of Jimmy Ennis. Ennis was born in 1932 in a town called Kilmeague in County Kildare. He was the youngest of two boys and two girls, and when he was only 2 years old, his dad died. His mother remarried, and I don't know if this played a part in the next step of his life, which was when he was 4 years old, he was sent to St. Joseph's Industrial School in Artane in Dublin. Industrial schools in Ireland were, in a nutshell, where children were sent to, if their family were too poor to have them, or if they had been in trouble with the law, and like by trouble they might have robbed apples out of an orchard, this type of thing, and they could be sent to an industrial school. We're not talking about like hardened criminals here. And these schools were not great. There would have been a lot of physical abuse, sexual abuse going on in them. I'm not saying that anything like that happened to Jimmy. There's no mention of anything like that. But just to give you an idea, these are not like a normal boarding school that you send your kids off to and that they come home, on the holidays type thing. These are bad places, like. So Jimmy would stay here until his late teens, and when he left, he was alone with no support system. So he would travel around Ireland looking for, seasonal work. Between 1950 and 1954, he had 4 convictions for petty crimes like larceny and malicious damage. And then in 1954, he served 6 months for stealing a bicycle. In the late 1950s, Jimmy got some work on a farm owned by George Appleby. He was said to be a hard worker, and he would have been paid well. He was actually quite small, quite short. He was only 5'3.5" but he was said to be, quite strong. And then he had fair hair and blue eyes. But in 1958, the work dried up. So by December 1960, Jimmy Ennis was back in Kildare working. On Monday, the 12th of December, 39-year-old Mary Reynolds was at home in her small bungalow in Clane, County Kildare. Her husband, Joseph, was at work, and the couple didn't have any children. In the afternoon, there was a knock at Mary's door, and when she opened it, she found a strange man standing there. He told her that he was working in a field nearby, and he asked if he could have some boiling water for tea. This would have been like a common thing for labourers and stuff to do. They would actually ask, people for boiling water or whatever to make tea. And there was actually a thing called a billy can. It's basically like a large bucket that you would put the water in and make your tea or whatever. So Mary agreed and told him to come back in 10 minutes. But just minutes later, Jimmy Ennis was standing behind her in the kitchen. He was holding a beet crowner, which is like a type of knife, and he told her to give her any money that was in the house. One source says that, like she refused and that he hit her, and then another source just kind of says that she runs to the next room. But either way, she runs to the next room. Jimmy, however, manages to get into the room too, and again demands money. So she throws her purse at him. He then struck her on the head with the knife, as well as her hands and arms. One source says that she was hit 14 times, and another one says 50. The handle of the knife actually broke off. So Jimmy took £5 from the purse. He also stole a watch. Mary managed to stumble to the bed and then collapse. The doctor would actually say that the way she curled up on the bed saved her life, because it helped to stem the blood loss from her head. Just after 3 p.m, Joseph arrived home to find blood in the kitchen and the back door open. He would find his wife lying in bed covered in blood with deep wounds to her head. She was rushed to Richmond Hospital in Dublin. After Ennis left the house, he cycled to Young's Cross, which is on the border of Selbridge, which is in Kildare, and Lucan, which is in Dublin. He abandoned his bike and got the bus into Dublin city centre. When he got to Euston Station, he then got a train to Cork City. Once he arrived there, he then got another bus to Carrick-Hill. But only minutes after getting off the bus, Jimmy Ennis walked into the Garda station. At 7 p.m, Inspector Eamon Doherty in Clane Garda Station got a call from a sergeant in Carrick-Hill, who told him that they had a man who claimed to have attacked a woman earlier that day in Clane. So Doherty and two other guards travelled to Cork by public transport, no less. And when they got there, Ennis agreed to come back with them. Doherty would describe Ennis as very cooperative, and he made a full statement. This meant that Mary didn't have to be interviewed or testify in court. At the Garda station in Clane, Jimmy's clothes were taken from him, and so the Gardaí, they were asked to give him any old clothes that they might have. And so Detective Tom Connolly, who we have heard of before in the Shaw and Evans video, he was one of the lead detectives there. So at this point he's still only a guard in the 60s. But he gave him a pair of black 8.5 size shoes. In April 1961, the trial began, and Ennis was charged with the attempted murder of Mary Reynolds, robbery with violence, unlawful and malicious wounding, and stealing a watch. On Monday, the 24th, Ennis pleaded guilty to all counts except for the attempted murder, which was dropped. He insisted that he did not intend to kill her. The judge could have imposed a life sentence for the robbery alone, but he didn't, mainly due to the fact that Ennis was so cooperative, and because he had confessed, it meant that Mary didn't have to, go through the trial. Mary would be in hospital for a month. A doctor would say that she suffered, sustained serious brain injury, and one article that I found described her as childlike. For the rest of her life, she would have no memory of the attack. So Ennis got 4 years for the robbery, 3 years for the malicious wounding, and 1 month for stealing a watch. But these were to be served concurrently, which means altogether. So that basically meant he was sentenced to 4 years. That's another thing that annoys me about systems when sentences are served concurrently. It doesn't matter then why you're giving them all these charges. It doesn't make a difference if they're still only going to serve the one amount of time. So 29-year-old Jimmy Ennis was sent to Portlaoise prison. On Thursday, the 23rd of April 1964, Jimmy Ennis was released from Portlaoise prison on good behaviour. He left with £11, 2 shillings and 2 pence, as well as a one-way ticket to Cork. So he boarded the 11:55 a.m. train, and he arrived in Cork just after 3 p.m. He checked into a guest house and slept until the following morning. So on Friday, the 24th, he got up and he walked to his former employer's farm, George Appleby. If you were thinking that he went to see if there was any work going, you'd be wrong, because he arrived at 4 p.m. and didn't go and knock. Instead, he hid in a ditch and waited till it got dark. That night, 51-year-old George Appleby and his wife, 49-year-old Annie, had been at home with their 22-year-old son. Their older son and a farmhand were actually out at a dance, so they wouldn't get home till late. So George and Annie and the son all said goodnight to each other and went up to bed. So when the house got dark, Ennis made his move. Just after midnight, he walked into the farm, and in the front yard he found a screwdriver and a 1.5 foot long iron bar. He walked around to the back of the house, knocked in the window and climbed through. He forced open a drawer of a desk and found a wallet inside which would contain £10. He then made his way to the stairs, took off his muddy boots and made his way up. He first went into 2 empty rooms and didn't find anything. He then made his way into George and Annie's room. While opening a press, George stirred and in the darkness said, "Who's that?" or "Who's there?" And Jimmy swung the bar down, over and over and over. The attack lasted minutes, and while hitting George, he also managed to hit Annie, who had been sleeping beside her husband. And then Ennis left. Annie fell out of the bed and tried her best to make it around to George's side, to her husband's side, but she collapsed and she would lie there on the floor in the dark for hours. It would only be the following morning at 9 a.m. when the 2 sons came down and, found that their parents weren't in the kitchen or anything like that, that they went up to their bedroom to see where they were. They found their father, George, lying dead in bed, covered in blood, and their mother collapsed on the floor. She was mumbling something like "turn on the light" over and over again. So they carried her into a different room and started to comfort her, and then they phoned the Gardaí and an ambulance. Annie had been hit 3 times with the bar. She would spend 4 months in hospital, and like Mary, she would then have no memory of the attack afterwards. The state pathologist, Professor Maurice Hickey, said that George sustained no other injuries to any other part of his body other than his head. He had suffered between 4 and 12 blows, and the left side of his face and skull were completely crushed. His death was almost instant, and the violence used was extreme. Ennis had left the bar beside George in the room. He also took a pair of shoes before he left, and when he got downstairs, he found a coat and hat belonging to George and took them as well. Once he got to a laneway, he threw his own coat away and also threw away the wallet that he took the £10 from. He got back to the guest house at about 6:30 a.m, had breakfast and went to bed. So when Gardaí arrived at the farmhouse, they found old muddy shoes by the stairs that just seemed to be out of place. They checked with the sons, and they confirmed that no one in the house owned those boots. They checked on previous employers of George Appleby, and they found that a Jimmy Ennis had a conviction for an attack on a woman a few years previous, and that he had just been released 2 days earlier from prison. They also checked in with Clan Garda Station and spoke to Tom Connolly, who, when shown the boots, was able to confirm that these were the boots that he had in fact given to Jimmy Ennis 3 years before. When Ennis woke in the afternoon, he packed George's coat and shoes into a suitcase. He then travelled to the bus station and left them there. He then checked into a different guest house and slept until the following morning. By this point, every Garda station in Ireland has been alerted to Jimmy Ennis. Ports were notified, everything. But somehow, the next morning, Sunday at 8 a.m, Ennis managed to walk by Gardaí and detectives in Glenmire Station and get on a train to Dublin. There were kind of 2 parts to, how he got away with this, I suppose. They all had his photo, but the photo was from when he went into Portlaoise prison 3 years ago. And Ennis had become a lot, more haggard looking since, being in prison, and then now he was released. So he didn't really match the photo that they had. On that Sunday, there was also a hurling match in Dublin between Cork and Dublin, and so there was thousands and thousands of fans on the trains going to Dublin. So this helped Ennis evade Gardaí in the Cork train station, on the train itself, and then when he arrived in Amiens Street station, he was able to walk past the Gardaí out to Dublin. But again, like we've seen before, only minutes later, he arrived onto Talbot Street and saw a newsstand and saw that the newspapers said that George Appleby was dead. And Ennis would say that he then felt, he felt sorry for what he had done because he hadn't realised that he had killed him. And so he walked into Store Street Garda Station and told Sergeant Peter Sherlock, quote, "I have seen in the papers the police want to see me. Here I am." So at 1 p.m, Detective Superintendent Bernard McShane, Superintendent John Cookley, and Detective Inspector James Dempsey arrived to interview Jimmy Ennis. But by this point, Ennis claimed he didn't know what had happened. He told them that yes, he had been in Cork, but that he met a woman whose name he couldn't remember and spent the night with her on Friday. He would stick to this story for 6 hours. So at around 7 p.m. that evening then, he was having tea with the Gardaí, as you do, when suddenly he felt the severity of his own rage and what he had done. And so when they finished their tea, he said, "Tear up that statement. I want to make a confession." So he would go on to explain, what happened. And that's basically how we have the story. That's how we know how everything happened. He would then go on later to say that it was because George grabbed him and that there was a scuffle and that he only remembers the first blow and doesn't remember anything after that. He also told them where they could find the suitcase with George's belongings, and they did. So Ennis was put on remand in Mountjoy prison, and during this time he made 2 attempts at self-harm, but they were in front of staff, so it is believed that these were just, efforts to get attention. One doctor described him as a belligerent psychopath, a man of unstable personality whose actions would be unreliable under stress. The trial would take place in November 1964 and last 6 days. The defence would argue manslaughter, that Ennis didn't intend to kill George, that he didn't bring the weapon with him, he found it there, and that he didn't know that his actions were wrong, like he didn't realise what he was doing. He said that the bar was, only for him to break into the house. But the prosecution argued that he could have left after he had gotten the £10, he could have then left. That by going upstairs, he knew there was people upstairs sleeping. And also, if the bar was only to break in, why was he still carrying it when he went up the stairs? Why did he bring the bar with him when he knew there was people upstairs? When Ennis was asked this, he just said, "I don't know." The jury was asked to decide between murder and manslaughter. Did Jimmy Ennis intend to kill George Appleby? They deliberated for just 2.5 hours and found Jimmy Ennis guilty of murder. Justice McLaughlin told Ennis that if the death penalty hadn't been abolished that year, that he would have sentenced him to hanging. So Ennis was one of the first in Ireland to receive the mandatory life sentence. He didn't deal well with prison life in the beginning and actually spent some time in the Central Mental Hospital before finally settling into Mountjoy prison. So that part there is the story of Jimmy Ennis and his crimes. The next part of the story really is Jimmy Ennis in prison and staying in prison because he didn't want to leave. So since 1982, the prison service were essentially trying to get Ennis to leave. In fact, different ministers of justice would tell him, you can go, you can leave. But Ennis was never happy with the conditions on the outside, and he would turn down the offer of halfway houses. In 1986, he was transferred to Shelton Abbey, and if you've watched the Sean Evans video, you'll have heard of Shelton Abbey, and you might remember that I mentioned a prisoner there that had been there so long that, they kind of just done their own thing. So this is Ennis, basically. This is Jimmy Ennis. So he was there so long, he was basically described as part of the furniture. When he wanted a break, he would request a transfer to Arbor Hill prison in Dublin for a little while, for a few weeks, and then he'd go back. That was his little holiday. Ennis was described as sociable and hardworking. He earned $2.35 a day for doing, jobs around the prison. That's what the prisoners make. And he would then also go and do odd jobs for people in Arklow, which is the town just outside the prison. So that is the part that I mentioned in the Sean Evans video, where he was allowed to go off and do his own thing, and then he would just return at night to go to bed, back to his room or whatever. And there's been a joke in one of the sources, it's kind of a joke about that he has his own keys to the prison kind of thing. In a 2008 news article, Ennis and other prisoners at Shelton Abbey basically raised goats to send off to Uganda. In 2009 then, there's an article that said Ennis was making steps to staying in a halfway house in Dublin. He would go and, you know, he would stay there, and he might go to the corner shop to get the paper, and then he'd come back, and then that would kind of be it. In a 2016 news article, he is still at the prison, but then in a 2018 article, it talks about how he was released in the previous 2 years. So obviously between 2016 and 2018 is when he left, and since 2018 I can't find any news on it. He would now be in his early 90s. Yeah, so there's no more news on him. As bad as it probably sounds to say, the next time we probably hear will be when he's passed away. It cost between 84,000 and 104,000, sources differ, to house Jimmy Ennis in Shelton Abbey every year. But sources basically said that it would be inhumane to just kick him out and just, you know, with no support system, no plan in place for him, because he wouldn't survive. He wouldn't have known what to do. That's why he always refused it, because the fear, I'd say, of going, you know what I mean, probably just cut that option off. Ennis spent about 15 years of his life not in an institution in Ireland, between the industrial schools and prison. So Jimmy Ennis was basically institutionalized. He wouldn't survive in normal life. And so that's probably why he eventually left, even because he was put into a nursing home. So again, he, you know, still had everything kind of done for him, if that makes sense. As in, like, he's never really needed to look after himself. And when he has been out, obviously then the consequences were bad, you know what I mean? Sometimes when I think of the story or I read the story, you feel bad in a way. You're kind of like, you feel like you think now of this old man who was in prison who didn't want to leave because he would not survive on the outside. But then I have to remember, like, when he was, you know, in his 20s and in his 30s, and he done, you know, awful things. You know, he changed, like, he took someone's life and he changed two women's lives and their families' lives forever. You know, as I described, Mary, you know, basically, you know, had a significant brain injury, and he, you know, also suffered as well and was in hospital for months. So your sympathy kind of goes pretty quickly when you remember the victims of the story. So yeah, that was today's story about Jimmy Ennis. It was a bit different, I suppose. It was kind of more from a different point of view, I suppose. But hopefully you enjoyed listening, and I hope to be back pretty soon. I have my list of cases that I want to do and I'm ready to go. So hopefully it won't be as long until you see me again, until you see my mush. But yeah, so please stay safe, take care, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.